Alright, so welcome to my YouTube channel, and today we are going to be looking at the synthesis of peptidoglycan. In our previous video, we looked at the components of peptidoglycan. So please, if you missed that, go back and watch before you come to this. Now, synthesis of peptidoglycan. We want to look at how peptidoglycan is synthesized. Now, first, there are 5 stages in the synthesis of peptidoglycan. So I'm going to be taking them step by step. So the first step in the synthesis of peptidoglycan is the cytoplasmic phase. Cytoplasmic phase. Now, I'll need you to understand something here. For bacteria, we have gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. And the difference is in the composition of their cell membrane or cell wall. Now, if you look at this, for gram-positive bacteria, we have something like this. We have something like this. And let's say this is the outer membrane. And this is the inner membrane. This is for gram-positive. But for gram-negative bacteria, they have a double membrane. Meaning you have something like this, where this is the inner membrane or the cytoplasm. Sorry, this is the, let's take this as the cytoplasm. That's inside the cell now, cytoplasm. And here is the extracellular matrix. That's outside the cell. Now, for gram-negative bacteria, we have a double membrane. Here is the cytoplasm. Here is the inner membrane. Here is the outer membrane. So you see that in gram-negative bacteria, they have 2 membranes, and there is a space between the 2 membranes. This space between the 2 membranes in gram-negative bacteria is called the periplasm, or you call it the periplasmic space. I need you to understand it because we are going to be using this idea in our synthesis. So, gram-positive bacteria, they have just 1 membrane. Then this is the cytoplasm, and this is the extracellular matrix. While gram-negative bacteria, they have a double membrane. The inner membrane and the outer membrane. Then the space between the inner membrane and the outer membrane is called the periplasmic space or periplasm. Good. Now, the synthesis of peptidoglycan, remember we've said that peptidoglycan is a major component of bacterial cell wall. And the synthesis of peptidoglycan in gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, they are basically the same thing. But as we go on, I'll tell you the difference between them. But they are based on the same principle. All right. Now, in the synthesis of peptidoglycan, the first step is the cytoplasmic phase. And in this cytoplasmic phase is taking place in the cytoplasm. This step is taking place in the cytoplasm. And in this first step, what we are synthesizing is the precursors of peptidoglycan. Peptidoglycan is made up of 2 major components, N-acetylmuramic acid and N-acetyl-glucosamine. Those are the 2 main components. Now, in the cytoplasmic phase, we want to synthesize those precursors. And the first thing, you start with glucose. So glucose, from glucose, we can actually synthesize N-acetylglucosamine. So from glucose, we can synthesize N-acetylglucosamine. Now, from N-acetylglucosamine now, the next thing that can be done here is UTP can come in. UTP is nucleoside triphosphate, that is uridine triphosphate here, can come in, and a phosphate group is given off. So we'll be having, this is uridine triphosphate. If 1 phosphate is given off, you know what is left here is uridine diphosphate. So the uridine diphosphate will attach to this to form uridine diphosphate NAG. Now, this is just activation of the NAG. You are just activating the NAG. Now, the next thing is this. Remember that if you want to synthesize N-acetylmuramic acid from N-acetylglucosamine, from our previous video we said that the only thing you are adding to N-acetylglucosamine to get N-acetylmuramic acid is what? Lactic acid, right? Lactate. So if lactate comes in, I want to keep it very simple. If lactate comes in, we'll be having what? UDP what? NAN. So we just attach lactate to form pyridine diphosphate and acetylmuramic acid. Now remember that we are always adding something, right? We are always adding something to our N-acetylglucosamine and N-acetylmuramic acid to form our peptidoglycan. And that thing we are always adding is our what? Pentapeptide, right? So our pentapeptide will be added, and the pentapeptide is made up of alanine, glutamine, lysine, and 2-alanine. And don't forget, I said in our previous video, please, if you missed that, please go and watch that first video. It will give you more insight into what we are doing here. Now, this first one is in what configuration? Is it D or L? D, L. No, sorry, this first one is in the L configuration. This D, this L, and this D, D. Alright, so now, if you attach your pentapeptide, then what you'll be having, if you attach your pentapeptide and UDP is giving off, you'll be having N-acetylmuramic acid pentapeptide complex. So basically, this is the first step. This thing is taking place in the cytoplasm. Glucose to N-acetylglucosamine. Then from N-acetylglucosamine, we activate it by adding UTP. So we'll have UDP N-acetylglucosamine. From there, we can get our N-acetylmuramic acid, meaning lactate can attach, and we'll get UDP N-acetylmuramic acid. Pentapeptide will be attached. We can still leave this UDP here if we want. So we can still have UDP N-acetylmuramic acid pentapeptide complex. Now remember that all these things are happening where? In the cytosolic phase, right? In the cytoplasm. So this is the first step of the synthesis of peptidoglycan. I told you this first step, what we are synthesizing is the precursors we need, NAG and NAM. We've gotten NAG from here. We've gotten NAM. Our pentapeptide has been attached. So we'll move on to the next phase now. Alright, we've seen the first step, which is cytoplasmic phase. The second step in the synthesis of peptidoglycan is membrane associated phase. Membrane associated phase. Now, in this, remember that what we were synthesizing in the first phase, the precursors, were done in the cytoplasm. Let me draw this. I'll be using gram-negative bacteria. I've explained the difference between gram-negative bacteria and gram-positive. So I'll be using this. Now, this is the inner membrane. This is the outer membrane. And remember, the space between the inner membrane and the outer membrane is called what? Periplasmic space, or you call it periplasm. Now, in this cell membrane, now please listen attentively. In this cytoplasmic space here, we've synthesized our NAG, was here, our NAM, pentapeptide complex have been formed. All these things are in the cytoplasmic space, are in the cytoplasm. But now there is something here. There is a carrier here in this, attached to the membrane of this inner membrane, attached into this inner membrane, fixed here. And that substance is actually a carrier. It is called bactoprenol. Bactoprenol is attached into this inner membrane here. It's there. So now what will happen? Bactoprenol is actually bactoprenol phosphate. So now this membrane associated phase now. First, N-acetylmuramic acid pentapeptide that we've synthesized in the first phase, we attach to this bactoprenol phosphate. That's the first thing happening. No, it will attach to this bactoprenol phosphate. So we're actually linking the N-acetylmuramic acid pentapeptide complex to the bactoprenol phosphate. Then after that, the next thing is N-acetylglucosamine, UDP N-acetylglucosamine, we now attach. Now let me take that again. First thing is N-acetylmuramic acid pentapeptide complex, we bind to bactoprenol phosphate to form what we call lipid 1. After lipid 1 has been formed, UDP N-acetylglucosamine will now bind to that complex to form lipid 2. That's the end of the membrane associated phase. In the cytoplasmic phase, we synthesize UDP N-acetylglucosamine and N-acetylmuramic acid pentapeptide. In the membrane associated phase, first, N-acetylmuramic acid pentapeptide binds to bactoprenol. And as it binds to bactoprenol, it will form lipid 1. UDP N-acetylglucosamine will now bind to that complex to form lipid 2. Now, we'll look at the third step now. Alright, so now the third step. The third step is actually flipping, or you call it translocation or transport. So let's call it translocation. Now remember that in the membrane associated phase, remember that this stuff here, this N-acetylglucosamine and all these things have been attached to bactoprenol phosphate. Now this bactoprenol phosphate, now in the next step, we flip this thing we have here into the periplasm, into the periplasmic phase. So this now will be, everything we have here, this complex will be flipped into the periplasmic space. So we'll not be having it here again, but now everything here is transported to this periplasm. Note that this is for the gram-negative bacteria. If it's gram-positive bacteria, you know, if it's flipping it to this side, it's just outside the cell, right? Outside. Good. Now, so this is the translocation. First, we synthesize our precursors. Here, the membrane-associated phase. What we've synthesized now, we attach to bactoprenol. Then the next phase is flipping, translocation. So the whole of this, we flip into the periplasmic phase. The periplasmic phase. Pause. I was supposed to draw something in. The fourth phase is called polymerization. Polymerization. Remember that peptidoglycan is composed of N-acetylmuramic acid, N-acetylglucosamine, like that. So it's just N-acetylglucosamine. This is how it looks like. So we have alternating units of N-acetylmuramic acid, N-acetylglucosamine, just like that. So if we've synthesized this now, remember at this point, what we have now, let me draw this again. What we now have here, let's say, what we have here is NAG, NAM. NAG, NAN, just like that. Okay, we just have one of it here, right? Now, but you remember that our NAM, we have pentapeptide attached to it. Good. And bactoprenol is still attached. Bactoprenol is still attached to this. Now, there is an enzyme that will elongate this, chain. The enzyme elongating this chain or polymerizing this is called transpeptidase. Now let me say something here. The last step still in polymerization, here we must have two chains of this. So in polymerization, we will have two chains of this. And in these two chains will be linked together to make the peptidoglycan strong. So the last step in peptidoglycan synthesis is cross-linking. So NAG and NAM, these two chains will be linked together. And the enzyme doing that is called transpeptidase or penicillin binding protein. Penicillin binding protein. That is why some antibiotics can actually come here. Those ones that act against the cell wall, they can come and inhibit the last step of peptidoglycan synthesis. That is, they prevent this cross-linking of NAG and NAM. So some antibiotics, the beta-lactam antibiotics, where our penicillin falls, can do that. All right, so basically that's polymerization. So polymerization, you just make everything long, elongate it. Then the last step is recycling. Remember that bactoprenol is still bound to this bactoprenol phosphate. So we want to recover our bactoprenol so it will go back and bring others. So removal of phosphate, so dephosphorylation, we actually remove the bactoprenol. So the bactoprenol returns back and we have our peptidoglycan here. We have our peptidoglycan formed. So basically those are the 5 steps in peptidoglycan synthesis. Cytoplasmic phase, where we synthesize our precursors. Membrane associated phase, where bactoprenol binds to it. Translocation, where the bactoprenol is flipped, so we flip this to the periplasmic phase. Polymerization, where we make it long, having 2 chains, and we cross-link. Then recycling, dephosphorylation will return the bactoprenol back into where it's supposed to be, into the membrane. So these are the steps involved in peptidoglycan synthesis.